On Answers for a Living, we explored that David ate bread from the altar that was only to be eaten by the priest. And we also discovered that the Sabbath, which was a day of rejuvenation and refreshment, had become a rigid requirement. Let me show you how a day of rest had become so regimented. The question arose among the leaders, what is the definition of work? So to help God out, they made 39 definitions describing what work was. One example would be this: if an ox fell into a ditch on the Sabbath, you could help him out of the ditch. But if the ox was hurt, you couldn't give medical attention to the ox until the next day. The reason? Some people made their living from medicine, so giving medical assistance was work. Now, there were two exceptions: a person who was dying, a woman who was giving birth, then you could give medical assistance. On the Sabbath, if your neighbor was out of bread, you couldn't take bread to his house. That was work. But if your neighbor lived close enough that you could throw the bread from your window to his window, that wasn't work. Third example is, on the Sabbath, you couldn't look in a mirror because you may see a gray hair and be tempted to pull it out, and that would be work. Fourth, they had rules about threshing. Now, God had said you couldn't use a sickle on the Sabbath. That would be threshing. But the religious leaders wanted to define threshing a little bit more. So the rule was, if you pulled the grain off the wheat, and then you rubbed your hands together to get the kernel of wheat, that was threshing, and that was work. So the religious leaders had taken a gift from God and made it a burdensome obligation. Now, I want to take a sidebar. When Jesus Christ died on the cross, he said, "It is finished." The word he used was tetelestai, which means paid in full. One of the things he meant was our obligation to the law of God was now fulfilled. That is one reason the curtain was torn from the top to the bottom in the temple. The Old Testament law no longer had any authority. You are no longer bound by the law. Now, some people think that obedience to the law is the way to heaven. Well, the law never was the stairway to heaven. The law showed us we could never get to heaven on our own. The Bible says that the law was like a tutor, instructing us that we can't ever be perfect enough to make it to heaven on our own.